Hi, I'm Jia. I'm 21.
So I just wanted to make a quick video to break down the cinematography for an interview I filmed with a founder named Jia. We're just going to touch on 5 points: finding the area of interest for a frame, finding the planes of contrast, determining exposure, finding depth, and color. These are just 5 that came to the top of my mind. One thing I found from filming interviews is that there's actually rules for when something looks good. We intuitively know when something looks good, but there's actually very concrete reasons something is easy to look at. And I think the number one goal in cinematography is to find what you want people to look at and make it easy for them to look at it. And so the first point I want to touch on is, what is the area of interest on the frame? If it's an interview, that's normally going to be the eyes. And so it's going to be this very tight portion of the frame right here. And so you could have some craziness happening on the edges and people probably won't even notice it. And so our number one job is to make it as easy as possible to look at the eyes right here. And also one thing to take note of is that people are very attentive to human faces. When you see a human face, you have a natural instinct to immediately tune in and see what the person's saying. And so we need to determine the planes of contrast in the frame. And so if we look at this frame, you know, when I'm trying to find this, I'm basically like moving the camera around to see, different portions. Like you have the sky here, which it's a solid blue. And then you have this line of contrast. You see how there's like kind of a fine line there between the sky and the city, as well as the forest. So it basically reduces to, there's the shirt. This is one plane of contrast. You have the fence. This is another plane of contrast. And then you have the sky, which is another plane of contrast. It's almost, I think it's a survival instinct for us to find contrast in our field of view. So for example, motion, if my hand's moving over here, your eyes will move towards it. Whenever we're composing a frame, wherever contrast sits is where the vision is going to go. And so let's say there's a point of contrast up here, you're going to create visual tension because our focal point is right there. Then we can think about how can we easily light this so that it's as easy as possible to look at the point of interest. So if the eyes are the point of interest, there's 3 planes of exposure here. There's the outside, right? This is everything outside of the room. This is like a glass wall you can't see. There's the actual room. So there's the ambient brightness in the room. And then there's the brightness of the face. Remember, the face is what we want to look at, and these eyes right here. There's 3 planes of exposure that we need to figure out. And so this is where it's very difficult because outside is much brighter than the inside. And so when I'm looking at this, it's important for me to make Gia's face as bright as possible, make sure the room has an acceptable exposure so that our eyes aren't too drawn. You can see how it's dark over here. Our eyes aren't too drawn to the interior. And we also want a respectable kind of exposure for the outside. And so it was a cloudy day. So we got a nice diffuse kind of exposure coming from outside. And then I put there's a light coming here from the left with a pretty big diffusion panel. The key is that the exposure on Gia's face is very, very prominent here. So if you see this in a social feed, it's really easy for you to tune in to a person with 2 eyes who's the brightest thing in the frame. So we're going to talk about depth. To make a frame more interesting, when there's more things going on far behind the subject, it makes you think about the scene, it makes you curious, and it makes you feel like you're actually there. So we actually have a massive amount of depth here. The more depth you give a frame, the more there is to contemplate, and the higher the person's interest. I just scribbled interest here, but the higher their interest will be to look at the frame. So for example, if you put someone in a white room, no matter how great the sound is, you won't really be curious about what setting you're in. There's 4 planes here. There's the city behind Gia. There's, this grassy green park. Basically like two points of interest outside. And then there's this deck behind her. And then there's this indoor setting, which is kind of hinted at here. So there's 4 planes of interest, maybe 5 if you count Gia's body, that create depth to the frame. And intuitively, this is what makes nature photos beautiful. There's so much depth to them. And then the 5th one, this is tougher to coordinate, but Gia chose to wear a black shirt here. And that actually acted as a perfect color to separate from this muted background, these muted tones caused by this diffusion of light by the clouds, which is actually great. It's great that San Francisco is foggy and cloudy because it creates this beautiful diffusion of light and it makes deeper greens. So immediately you're focused into this center of the frame, and then boom, you're going to look right there at the eyes because the face is so well exposed. Also, there's few colors here. There's not too much craziness. There's like this brown, which is the most prominent color. You're not overwhelmed with a color language that's confusing. It's very, very simple. And so here's a sixth point that I didn't add, the visual tension in the frame. If you look at the lines of this fence, so I had the choice to either make this perfectly horizontal, rotating her body a bit over, but the decision here was to keep the fence a bit slanted. So what that does is it creates this visual momentum going to the right. And where does that lead you? That's going to lead you right to her eyes. You also see this motion in the wall behind her right here. So what you're seeing is you're seeing this overall visual tension pulling you down to the right, and the eyes are sitting right here with a well-exposed face, a high contrast shirt, and a muted background that is the proper exposure. So these are all of the things that are happening invisibly that you might just not even notice or think about that make this frame very easy to look at. And something that's easy to look at is often intuitively beautiful.